Welcome to this special edition of Hannity, President Trump versus the oblivious left. I'm Janine Pirro, in tonight for Sean. For the hour, we'll discuss President Trump's battles with the left and Democrats, his recent clashes with the fake news media, and his ongoing feud with 2016 rival Hillary Clinton. You won't believe what she said this time. But first, we're going to start with President Trump's legal fight against California's sanctuary state policies. According to the Los Angeles Times, California Attorney General Xavier Becerra today released a policy guide to schools on how they should protect students from federal immigration enforcement. Now, this comes after California earlier this week wrote a clarification to state and local law enforcement that its sanctuary policies do not give them authority to disregard federal immigration law, but they do limit how they can cooperate with the feds. However, this battle is far from over. The Escondido City Council, along with the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, may become the latest two governing bodies there to join the Trump administration's lawsuit challenging the state's dangerous and reckless sanctuary policies. Joining us now with a report from Escondido, California, is Fox News correspondent Griff Jenkins. Hi, Griff.
Hi, Judge. There is undoubtedly a backlash here in California against the state's controversial sanctuary new laws. And here in Escondido, which is within San Diego County, it is definitely the next frontier in this battle. We came and spoke with the mayor here, Sam Abed, about what they plan to do on Wednesday of next week, April 4th. They're going to vote on an ordinance that would formally join the Trump administration's lawsuit against the sanctuary laws. And we also talked to him about how that has impacted his small community, much like we saw out of the reporting in Orange County yesterday. And Mayor Abed has a very strong message for California's governor and attorney general. Take a listen. What do you say to Governor Brown and Attorney General Becerra?
They are insane. They have reached the level of emotional state that is really affecting their own constituents. These two leaders in California, they care more about illegal criminals and protecting illegal criminals than protecting our citizens. This is a moral issue. This is immoral. This is illegal. This is unconstitutional, period.
And Judge, Mayor Abed came from Lebanon, an immigrant 30 years ago, and he says this isn't the America that he came to. If indeed on next Wednesday Escondido passes this ordinance, it will likely pave way for larger San Diego County to try and make a similar move. They are expected to do that sometime in middle April. While we were here, we also spent some time in the Los Angeles headquarters of ICE speaking to the director, David Marin, about how these laws are impacting ICE's difficult and tough work. Take a listen. You have this new state law, SB 54, and what's happening in Orange County. How is this impacting you? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, so the state law has been extremely detrimental to our operations. You know, these California politicians have really tried to put ways out there that prevent us from really protecting the public. So what has happened is these individuals, these criminal aliens that were trying to get off the street, they're now being released back out into the communities to commit more crimes. Makes it difficult for us. When, again, we're not asking California law enforcement agents to become immigration agents. That's not what we want. But when they have somebody in custody that we're looking for, we're just asking that they let us know and they allow us the opportunity to come pick that person up when they've finished with their criminal proceedings.
And Director Marin, Judge, also told me that on February 23rd, a drunk driver, deported multiple times, convicted multiple times, was released into the public and killed a 6-year-old girl. ICE believes they could have prevented that had this law not existed. Judge?
Terrible story there. Thanks, Griff. And meanwhile, today in Washington, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Acting Deputy Commissioner Ronald Vitello provided an update on further construction of the border wall. Take a listen.
Let me be clear, without the president and the administration's leadership and a commitment to border security, the funding for construction for these projects would not be possible. In San Diego, we're looking at 14 miles of new border wall, getting rid of old, dilapidated landing mats in favor of a steel bollard wall. In Calexico, we're on schedule and on budget to build a new 30-foot border wall. Continuing east, we're on track to 20 new miles of border wall in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. In addition, we have 4 new miles of border wall in El Paso, Texas. Finally, we plan to replace at least 47 miles of dilapidated border fencing with new border wall system in various locations along the southwest border. The U.S. Border Patrol, sector chiefs, and agents in the field have been vocal about their need for effective barriers to deny the entry of illegal aliens and contraband. The truth is, walls work, and the data show it, and agents know it.
The construction of the border wall is a huge step in the right direction. And as Hannity keeps saying, it's something along with tax cuts that will help President Trump and Republicans going into this year's very important midterm elections. And speaking of the midterms, President Trump, during his speech yesterday in Ohio, issued a stern warning to his supporters about the upcoming elections. Take a look.
We have a very important election coming up, and they don't like the wins we've been getting. They don't like that the economy, the Democrats, they don't like that the economy is so strong. They don't like that they don't have one vote on the tax cuts. Not one vote. And we should do well. History says that when you win the presidency, that party doesn't do so well in the midterms because people get complacent. They get complacent. We cannot be complacent. We've got the greatest economy maybe ever. Maybe in history. We have the greatest economy we've ever had. You know, the expression from, I guess it was Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. Well, it is the economy.
And the president's warning is spot on. According to a recent Fox News poll, Democrats hold a slight 5-point lead on who voters prefer in this year's midterms. However, it's down a whopping 15 points from last October. Joining us now to discuss this is Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry.
Good to see you, Judge.
Good to see you, too. All right. So what do you say about the midterms and what's going to be happening?
Well, look, the economy is going to be better for the president than anyone expected, and that could be the ace in the hole. This is going to be a tough year for Republicans. A new president comes into power. The midterms are always tough. But the bottom line is the Washington Post just did this massive study of Labor Department data. No fan of the president, the Washington Post. And they went through the data honestly and said that the counties that the president carried in battlegrounds like Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are creating jobs faster than any other counties in the country. They are recovering faster than anyone. What does that tell us? Number one, that this economy is strong. It's actually trickling down to real people, number one. And number two, that the president is keeping his promise to not forget about the forgotten man and the forgotten women. So that could actually break through. I'm not saying the Republicans are going to win. This is going to be a tough year for them.
Yeah, but Ed, when you think about it, the number was 15. It's now down to 5, the difference between Republicans and, I mean, they were predicting a
Correct.
slaughter.
Because real people are feeling the economy. Nancy Pelosi set this barrier. Don't anybody vote for it, right? As the president said in that sound clip. And so now no Democrat is on record for these tax cuts that are helping the economy, number one. And number two, Nancy Pelosi said it's just going to be crumbs. It's not really trickling down to anyone. Those numbers, the president's approval ratings coming up, and also the Fox poll you mentioned that shows that the gap between Democrats and Republicans in the midterm is tightening, is because of the economy. It's because real people are feeling real benefits.
And you know what would be very good as someone, you know, ran for office, I mean, to do an ad. My opponent didn't want you to get those tax cuts.
Right.
My opponent is not responsible. If he had or she had their way, there's no way you would have that benefit in your check.
And there's an ad that could be run that says that we promised, if the president and Republicans want to go to the American people, we promised we were going to cut your taxes, and we did it amid Democratic obstructionism. Not one Democrat in the House or Senate voted for it. And you know what would also be an effective ad is if you can actually start building the wall. And I think that sound clip from the border protection person is important. He's telling us something that people in Washington can't get their heads around. Everybody in Washington, both parties, think the president's going to build this big, beautiful wall sort of all at once, like in a week and a half. And it's going to be $20-30 billion. It's going to be hundreds of miles. No, listen to closely what he's saying. He's saying that we're building 2 miles here, 10 miles here. And they're going to build this brick by brick, whether the Democrats want the president to or not. This week, the president tweeted this photo of prototypes. And I think BuzzFeed and other news organizations said, oh, this is an old fence from the 90s. This is not even a real one. what people didn't grasp is, and if you listen closely to that sound clip, that leader was saying that there was an old fence from the 90s in Calexico, in California, on the Mexican border, and it was all broken down. It was recycled steel. It was just a few feet high. And they're redoing it right now as we speak to 30-foot high bollards. Another way of saying 30-foot high bollards, Judge, is a wall.
Oh,
and so
clearly.
people keep saying he's never going to build the wall, and the president says, I'm going to build it, and the fact checkers say he's not. He's building it as we speak.
Well,
people don't realize it.
You know what, Ed? I mean, between the wall and the money in their checks and the deregulation and making sure that middle America gets their jobs back, it might not be as predictable as some think. But
And that's why it's tightening.
We appreciate your
Good
input. Thanks, Ed. All right. And joining us with reaction to all of this is former Ohio Democratic Congressman and current candidate for Ohio Governor Dennis Kucinich. All right. Good evening. What shall I call you? Congressman? Dennis? Maybe Governor?
Dennis is fine, Your Honor.
All right. Touche. All right. Let's talk about the border wall. You know, one of the issues that people have been talking about is the fact that they think that it doesn't really serve a purpose. And whether it's a wall or some other kind of construction, you would have to agree that 80 to 90% of the drugs coming into this country, irrespective of whether there's a market for these drugs here, comes from our southern border.
Well, we want to do everything we can to stop the drugs from coming in and to stop them in the countries that they're coming from. That's true. But I'm not a fan of the border wall, Judge. I think that it's a waste of money. They can accomplish the same thing with electronic fencing. And that, you know, we have bridges in Ohio that are falling down. I'd rather see the money be spent on infrastructure here at home.
Well, would you tell your Democratic compatriots or Democrat compatriots to go to the table and talk to the president about infrastructure and, you know, taking care of the bridges and the roads?
Look, we need a lot of money to do that. It's probably going to take a couple $1 trillion. And if I was advising the president, I'm not, but I would say put more money in it and build more. Let's put America back to work rebuilding all these bridges and roads.
Well, but I want to go back, Dennis, to the whole issue of the wall versus the fence. You know, what we've seen is billions and billions of dollars. I mean, I remember talking about a fence, you know, when Bill Clinton was the president. I mean, there was a lot of talk about building some kind of separation, and that just hasn't worked. And I was at the border myself several months ago, and I have to tell you, they have these areas where during the monsoon season, they actually raise these gates or fences, and, you know, the illegals can come through, and they all are tunneling through, and they're popping up on the U.S. side. I mean, you know, we've got to stop the human trafficking and the drug dealing. And I think that the thought that technology can really perform the same function doesn't make sense, because with technology, you constantly have to be watching it.
Well, look, you know, in our backyards, we have motion detectors that can tell you if a cat's moving across the backyard. We're spending all this money on brick and mortar, and I think it could be better spent. But the deeper issue here is our immigration policies. I mean, yes, we have to protect the border, but, you know, right now what's happening is people who don't have a criminal record are being deported. There's been an increase in that.
Yeah, well, maybe they're not supposed to be here, with all due respect, Dennis. I mean, they're being deported because they weren't invited. They didn't do it legally. And I have to tell you something very powerful, and that is there was a mayor who just, from Escondido, I believe, who talked about making sure that the sanctuary cities aren't protecting the criminal illegals. He wasn't born here. People get it. It's about our safety. Or am I wrong?
Well, I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm going to say this, that there's a danger here of the federal government conscripting local and state police. The local police have to have discretion in law enforcement. Senate Bill 54 in California basically has stated that if we federalize the police, then we're going against the spirit of posse comitatus. And here in Ohio, we have a number of sanctuary cities. I agree with the sanctuary city principle. Columbus, Dayton, Lorain, Painesville, Oberlin, Lake County, these are all sanctuary places.
Well,
and, you know, we want to protect people who don't have criminal records.
Who came here illegally. You want to protect people. You know what? We're running out of time, but I got to tell you one thing, Dennis. What is so frustrating is that for all of the dangers that are consistent with someone being released by local law enforcement, you would think that people would stand up for American citizens because it becomes a danger zone.
The ones who are criminals, yes, but the people who have not
how are they
committed
going to
a crime,
get them if they don't share the information?
If they haven't committed a crime, they are protected by the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment.
Really? Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
We'll talk about that again. Thank you, Dennis Kucinich.
Thank
All
you.
right. Coming up, Hillary Clinton is at it again. After insulting half the country earlier this month, she's now making even more controversial remarks. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel is here to react as this special edition of Hannity continues. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. President Trump versus the oblivious left. She's back, and despite being urged to get out of the public spotlight by politicians and pundits on both sides of the aisle, oblivious Hillary Clinton just won't go away. After facing heavy criticism for her demeaning remarks about Trump voters while in Asia, the twice-failed presidential candidate is once again lashing out. During a paid speech at Rutgers University, Clinton complained that the recent criticism lodged against her is because she's a woman. Take a look.
People saying, get off the public stage and shut up, which is something we're hearing all the time.
Yeah.
How do you...
Well, that began to happen after the election.
Yeah.
And, the election was pretty traumatic. I was really struck by how people said that to me, mostly people in the press, for whatever reason, like, oh, go away, go away. And I had one of the young people who works for me go back and do a bit of research. They never said that to any man who was not elected. But I do worry that what's happened to the Republican Party is that it's being held captive by a very small group of powerful forces. We have seen the power of the NRA, for example.
While Hillary Clinton continues to bash Republicans and play the gender card, her speaking fees are taking a hit. According to reports, the $25,000 Hillary Clinton received for the speech you just saw was actually $7,000 less than Rutgers paid Jersey Shore reality TV star Snooki. So, joining us now with reaction is RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, I just want to say one thing. Hillary Clinton just said in that sound, she said that the press kept telling her to go away. Now, what I find shocking is they told her anything, given that she roped them off. Do you remember that during the campaign? She had them all roped off so she wouldn't have to talk to them. What's your take on Hillary and what she's doing in the public square?
Well, where do we start? I mean, she's so willing to play the sexist card when in reality, she is being treated exactly like any other nominee who would have continued to denigrate half of the country, who would continue to fail to acknowledge the failings of their campaign. And the other thing she doesn't acknowledge is what President Trump provided for the American people, which was a vision of more jobs and higher wages. And so by continually refusing to acknowledge the failings of her campaign and why she lost, she is hurting her party, and her party is saying, please go away. You are hurting us. No other previous nominee has put their foot in their mouths as much as Hillary Clinton has since this election ended.
And what's interesting is we never thought that Clinton machine would ever be confronted by someone as daring as some of these politicians to say, maybe it's time for you to go away, or as I say, to go back into the woods. But Ronna, the talk about the midterms in a presidential election, being, first term, I should say, it usually benefits the other party. But now with Hillary Clinton and this lunacy, her saying that the election was traumatic, doesn't this benefit Republicans?
It does, and I do think the people who aren't telling her to go away are the Democrat leadership. We haven't heard from Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, and what she said was truly insulting. To say that women only voted for President Trump because our husbands told us to, that is so denigrating. To say that we are against African Americans having jobs and progressing in our economy, that is so insulting. And so what she has said should be denounced by Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and these red state Democrats that we're not hearing from. Joe Donnelly, Debbie Stabenow in my state, Tammy Baldwin, Bill Nelson. Where are you? So it's interesting that the Democrat leadership is not distancing themselves as vocally as they should be from the very, very insulting comments of Hillary Clinton. And it is going to help us in these midterms because President Trump not only put forward a vision in this election, he is delivering. With people getting bigger paychecks and more jobs coming back, people are feeling so good about their lives. They have more money to spend on their families. This is something that they're going to take to the polls in November and say, I need to return Republicans to office because they are delivering for me and my family.
Well, and you know what? It's not just returning Republicans to office, but those Republicans who are like-minded, like President Trump. I think that going forward, it's only going to benefit candidates to at least talk the way President Trump does.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look at what President Trump has done in this year. ISIS is on the run. Our military is being funded. He cares about our borders and our laws. He cares about our judges, making sure they abide by our Constitution. And then just look at the deregulation and the tax cuts. 2/3 of Americans are seeing bigger paychecks because of President Trump. So every Republican should be looking at what President Trump did. He is a bold leader, and it is going to take a bold vision to win in these midterms. And we're going to need to get out there and make our case. We're starting to see those numbers close. The RNC's raised double the DNC. We are in all these battleground states. We know we have to keep these majorities because we have something to fight for. America's on the comeback, and we cannot go back to the Schumer-Pelosi dark ages.
All right, Ronna, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And joining us now with more reaction is Fox News contributor and Washington Times columnist Charlie Hurt, the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform, Lawrence Jones, and Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. All right, Tammy, I'll start with you because you're sitting next to me and you're a woman. What do you think of this woman, Hillary Clinton? What is happening with her?
Look, this is a woman who spent pretty much all of her adult life expecting to become president, probably put up with a lot with her husband, expecting he was going to be the entree. All of the decisions she made, she was told that this would be delivered to her. And really, the nomination was. And this tells you how the system used to work. And then that black swan of Donald Trump showed up. And the American people interrupted that by, in fact, remembering that they're the sovereign and deciding that they wanted something more and better. Now, for her to be able to move on to a fourth act, which she can do, and deal with policy, and this is one of the problems. Look, she is harming the Democrat Party because she is complaining. And she says, no man was ever told to shut up. Look, Al Gore, even if you disagree, of course, with his global warming stuff, it's still about policy. McCain and Romney dealing with policies and issues that you can debate. Hillary is not doing that. And this is why it's harming the party. And it's why, as a feminist, it's embarrassing, I think, for every woman out there that this woman who's the first major party nominee is behaving so badly. We deserve better. And I believe the Republicans are going to deliver better for us and women.
Charlie, when Hillary Clinton says no man has ever been told to shut up, is that the truth?
No, of course not. All of these people that have run terrible races and lost have all been told to shut up. But I could not agree with Tammy more. What is so embarrassing about all of this is that every single one of these people who went on to drone on and on, like John Kerry, and I didn't want to hear him before the election, much less after the election, they were at least talking about things and talking about issues they cared about. This is what all Hillary is talking about is blaming everybody for why she lost, and it's so depressing. And to hear her talk about what a traumatic event it was, it makes you sort of wonder if maybe it hasn't even fully sunken in yet that she actually lost. And she's still sort of grappling with it on a very personal way, and it's embarrassing. And you kind of tend to want to turn away and not not watch. It's so,
and
it's
tell
so
her,
gruesome.
And Lawrence, I mean, wouldn't you agree this is the kind of thing to discuss in therapy and not necessarily in front of the in front of the nation? Lawrence, your take. Anybody ever tell you to shut up? A woman?
I think we tell a lot of people to shut up when we disagree with it. I know on the right, we told Mitt Romney to shut up when he started to get back involved with the primary, talking about Donald Trump. And so when people, members of political parties, don't agree with past leaders that have failed leadership, generally we tell them to move on and let the new leadership come in. But I think this goes back to something mentally with Hillary Clinton, because for far too long the Democratic Party has operated off of identity politics, and they traditionally have won. And that was until Donald Trump came and talked about money with the American people. The people weren't concerned about identity politics. They were concerned about their families and having to live paycheck to paycheck. And so Hillary Clinton, being a veteran politician, didn't know how to handle that. She realized that her strategy, for once, the Democratic strategy, just didn't work. And I think it's hard for her to comprehend that.
You know, and Tammy, you make a very good point about, you know, here's a woman who was touted as this great United States Senator, wonderful Secretary of State. She probably should discuss issues of policy.
Sure.
That is,
Sure.
if she's capable.
Yes, this is it. I mean, there's a point where we all make mistakes, and the way that we're able to move on and remake ourselves, or at least become influential again, is make a determination of what went wrong and what I can do now and what the priority is. But this is the problem for the Clintons. It's never been about other people.
That's
it's
right.
never been about policy, really, in the end. And this is where you see the kind of the nakedness. Not that we want to
Judge,
think
that's
of that
why
right now.
she didn't.
See,
Judge, that's why she didn't go to Middle America. She
yeah.
won't take responsibility for going to all those
let me
locations.
Let me just add, though, that this is the problem, and I think that for young women, for women who are homemakers, all of us who've wanted a woman to be president, we like breaking these barriers.
Sure.
We like the underdog. This can't be, and we don't want it to be, the imagery that is left about how women run for president and what's left.
That's a very good point.
This is why when we think about the next president, Nikki Haley,
That's right.
any of the other women, even Ivanka Trump, women who are dynamic. You might disagree with them, but the GOP bench is deep with women who think about policy and want to change.
You know, I want to get Charlie in here. You know, Charlie, when you talk about what Tammy just hit on, which I think is very important, and that is, this is hurting other women now. It's not about you.
Yeah.
So, and it's also hurting the Democrats. When are they going to get the hook and yank her?
When I look around and I see
meant.
all of the strong, successful, powerful women in all aspects of professional life, they all earned it on their own. And what's strange about Hillary Clinton is she got to where she is because of her husband. And for her to then talk like she's this sort of Joan of Arc of women's accomplishment, and then turn around and denigrate all of the strong, independent women who voted for Donald Trump, it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around. And she really is sort of more the face of entitlement than she is
right.
of strong, successful, powerful woman.
Great conversation. Thank you all.
Thanks, Judge.
Thanks, guys.
Coming up, the left is proven wrong yet again on Russia. We'll tell you why relations between the Trump administration and Moscow got even worse today. Stay with us as this special edition of Hannity continues. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. Ever since Trump took office, the left has tried to attack the president as being soft on Russia. But this week, the president showed great strength against Vladimir Putin when the U.S. expelled 60 Russian diplomats and closed a Russian consulate in Seattle. President Trump's tough action was in response to Russia's suspected poisoning of a former Russian double agent and his daughter in Great Britain earlier this month. Today, The Telegraph is reporting that the spy's daughter is, quote, conscious and talking. Yesterday, in retaliation, Moscow ordered the expulsion of 60 U.S. diplomats and the closing of the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg. And today, Russia has expelled diplomats from an additional 23 countries. This tension comes as Russia's defense ministry released a video supposedly showing the test launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile named Satan II by NATO. Joining us now with reaction is Fox News contributor and syndicated columnist DeRoy Murdoch and the author of Direct Fire, former Brigadier General Tony Tata. All right, General, I'm going to ask you, since we're talking about that video that supposedly shows an intercontinental ballistic missile that they say has Florida in the background. Now, aside from their ability to do this and whether they have that, are we entering a new phase of a Cold War?
You know, I think we might be, Judge, and I'd just like to back up and say that I think President Trump, just as he unleashed us to defeat ISIS, has done more to attack and defend against Russia than President Obama ever did. And then as we look at the missile that President Putin supposedly showed the launch of, that is attacking the concept of mutual assured destruction. And what he wants to do is to make sure that we feel uneasy about our ability to defend against the weapons that Russia has. And so we launched off a submarine a intercontinental ballistic missile this week in the Pacific Ocean. So Russia launches its
Oh, you don't hear about that as much.
Exactly,
oh, interesting.
Exactly.
Well, but it sounds like a tit for tat again.
Yeah, well, it's very much, and this is very much the almost war by proxy that we had in the Cold War, as you mentioned at the beginning of the segment. And this is through the elements of power: diplomatic, information, military, economic. You see spies being fired. You see information wars. That's an information piece.
They call it a spy spat.
Right. Exactly.
As I was reading, Dory, all the talk about the left and how the president is colluded, although after 14, 15 months, nobody has one iota of evidence. Is this going to hurt the left in terms of the midterms with the president being so tough on Russia? And not only that, Dory, he's got 23 countries. NATO, they're all backing the president. I mean, when Obama used to talk about it, there was no one behind him. Now there is.
Well, the left has been preaching this gospel for the last year and a half or so, that President Trump is a puppet of Putin and he does whatever Putin says. And yet you've seen, as you said, organizing this diplomatic effort to remove these diplomats from around the world. Just yesterday, I think it was, Poland announced it was going to purchase about $5 billion in anti-missile systems from the United States. Pointed to Russia, I'm sure. Trump has provided offensive weapons to Ukraine. I think about a month ago or so, there was an attack on 100 Russian mercenaries in Syria. They're now dead. So if he's a puppet of Putin, he's not a very well-behaved one.
Well, that's very well said.
Puppet.
There was talk today about two of our astronauts are on a vessel, on a Russian vessel that has gone into, I guess, outer space, the Soviet Soyuz. I mean, so is this all talk given that, everybody knows we've got Americans on this Russian vessel or whatever it's called?
Well, that's what I was saying earlier, Judge, is that this is information warfare. This is two countries posturing for power in the power vacuum that was left by the Obama administration before. President Trump and his national security strategy talks very much about peer competitors, China and Russia. And as I said, he's done more to compete now against China, Russia, North Korea than the previous administration. And we've got a $1 trillion worth of 30 years of modernization of the nuclear weapon arsenal that we've got, that President Trump has laid out. So he's taken this seriously, and he's standing up to Russia.
Right, and he's got some force behind his words. But DeRoy, Russia's acting like they're the victims in this whole thing. That they didn't deserve to be booted out. But the deadly nerve agent that was used, that no one could really, I guess, prove beyond a reasonable doubt, the daughter is now talking. She can, I imagine, tell us how the nerve agent was delivered, who may have delivered it, who the last person was that she saw. Things aren't looking good for the Russians, if indeed it is, as everyone is suggesting, the Russians who did this.
Yeah, I mean, we've had somebody who I guess the Russians may have wanted to be a corpse, who's now it turns out to be a witness, and she may be able to speak up and give this exact kind of evidence you're talking about. I think it's also fascinating that this case and other cases where people have been basically assassinated by Moscow, that they don't just use rat poison or put a pillow over somebody's face. They're using the kinds of agents that are tied back to Moscow, almost as if they want to leave their fingerprints behind. I wonder if that's something they deliberately want to do, maybe sending a message to others rather than just eliminating somebody who they find inconvenient.
All right, DeRoy Murdoch, General Tata, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Joe.
And coming up, the hit sitcom reboot of Roseanne has already been picked up for a second season. Some in the mainstream media finally realizing that the power of the forgotten men and women of this country matters. Joe Concha and Charlie Kirk will weigh in next as this special edition of Hannity, President Trump versus the oblivious left, continues. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Even look at Roseanne. I called her yesterday. Look at her ratings. Look at her ratings. I got a call from Mark Burnett. He did The Apprentice. He's a great guy. He said, Donald, I called just to say hello and to tell you. Did you see Roseanne's ratings? I said, Mark, how big were they? They were unbelievable. Over 18 million people. And it was about us. They haven't figured it out. The fake news hasn't quite figured it out yet. They have not figured it out.
That was President Trump yesterday in Ohio touting the huge ratings of the Roseanne reboot, all while taking a shot at the media for not understanding the power of the forgotten men and women in this country. The president is right. And now, after ignoring middle America for decades, Hollywood may finally be starting to catch on. According to the New York Times, quote, Roseanne reboot sprang from ABC's Heartland strategy after Trump's victory. And just hours ago, ABC announced that it is picking up Roseanne for a second season. Joining us now with reaction from the Hill, Joe Concha and founder of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk. All right, guys, I'll start with you, Joe. You know, the Hollywood is so shocked. It shocks me that they still don't understand how out of touch they are.
Well, you know, it seems like ABC found a starving niche audience, Gene, and that is half the country, right? I mean, even Democrats and independents, they have to be sick of what they're hearing on Colbert and Kimmel and Myers and the Daily Show and Will and Grace and other comedies where the same target is Trump and its political commentary dressed up as comedy. And I think it was very smart of ABC to go with Roseanne, an established brand. It was on the air for 9 years. One critic put it best. He said it felt familiar but new. But when you dig into the numbers, it's fascinating. Yes, 18 million people, highest in 4 years. But after people watch this on their DVRs over the weekend, they're talking 25 million. That's nearly as many as the Oscars. That's 6 million more than the Golden Globes. Then you break it down even more. In states where Trump won handily, like Oklahoma, 65% of the vote he got there, it was #1 there. But in New York, it didn't even break the top 20. In Los Angeles, not even the top 30. That tells you everywhere where we are right now in this country in terms of polarization and the city's not embracing or thinking this along the same lines as the rest of the country.
And you know, Charlie, what's interesting about this 18 million or 18.2 million are the demographics. A lot of young people watching, and, you know, a lot of them weren't even, you know, born when Roseanne was last on. So what do we attribute the entry of that huge demographic, the youth, who seem to be so kind of targeted as being all millennials who aren't interested in Trump or his agenda?
Well, look, Joe hit it out of the park. You know, you have an audience here that actually wants to see these kind of dynamics that they know exist in the real world. You look at all these other shows in Hollywood. It's just virtue signaling, sanctimonious, leftist dogma of how horrible President Trump is. Now, mind you, the Roseanne show, this wasn't like a pro-Trump commercial as some people in the media are trying to portray it as. There were one character who was very anti-Trump, and Roseanne, obviously, who played someone who voted for Trump, and they had real conversations. That's actually happening in the country. And the one point I want want to make is if you look at the coverage of this from the Washington Post and the New York Times, they portray it as if like, oh, wow, you can actually see how a real Trump supporter lives. Like it's some sort of like caged animal in a different country. They've never met one. So you can watch this show to go see how the real Trump supporters live. It just shows how out of touch, the elites are in both coasts. But look, this goes to show that there's two Americas. There's the America that goes to work every single day, that stands for the Pledge of Allegiance, that are patriots, and those on the coast that are like, wait a second, there's people that actually support this president still, and you can see the success in this show, and it really is amazing.
And Joe, one of the things that this mimics, of course, is the election itself, the election of Donald Trump, that just as Hollywood doesn't get it, and, now Roseanne is now set for a second season. I mean, the pollsters didn't get it in the election in 2016. They are so out of touch on so many levels. And yet there is a tweet by a former Amazon studio exec, Matthew Ball. He went on a tweet storm saying how little the success of Roseanne had to do with the president. What do you say?
Well, I think that this was a replay of the 2016 election from a media perspective. I remember right after the election, I heard a lot about soul searching, and maybe we need to get out to the middle of the country more to get the true pulse of the people, because we missed a lot of warning signs here as far as what people actually cared about, as opposed to what they were told they should care about from the ivory towers of media centers of like New York and Washington. And you know what's happened since then, as far as most of our media, they still don't get it. They still do the pontificating on their shows every day from New York, from Washington, from the major cities. And I don't see a lot of reporting. There are exceptions, of course, from the Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsins of the world. Ed Henry did a report, I know, talking about how job creation there is happening faster than the rest of the country. Maybe we want to report on that a little bit more and a little less on Stormy Daniels and Russia, which are stories, but there are degrees to everything. And the degrees on those are about 5 times higher than they should be.
And Charlie, very quickly, because we're coming up against a break, the whole idea of Roseanne, the protagonist, being pro-Trump, and then the other character, being the opposite. I mean, do you think that there is a possibility of a show like this teaching Americans to start talking to each other again about politics?
Yeah, civil discourse, dialogue, discussion, disagreement, not just having everyone think exactly the same, which is what Hollywood has become. There's no intellectual diversity there or political diversity at all. That's why people enjoyed the show, why it did so well. It's like, I can relate to this. It's real, it's authentic, it's true, and I've lived it myself. So it's really amazing to see.
All right, Charlie Kirk, Joe Concha, thanks so much for being with us. And coming up, more of this special edition of Hannity right after the break. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. President Trump versus the oblivious left. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left this evening. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to tune into Justice every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. And you can follow me on Twitter at Judge Janine and on Instagram at Judge_Janine. We hope you have a great night.